Our last speaker before we go into our lunchtime break will be Christine Schulman. As most of you are aware that have been coming to this conference or watching it virtually, each year we try to include a nurse speaker. And we're going to move a little bit more from the clinical to more challenging us to think of why we got into this to start with our professions. Christine is currently the trauma and critical care clinical nurse specialist at Legacy Health in Portland, Oregon. She is the immediate past president of the AACN, with her term ending just this recent June. She received her bachelor's from the University of Wyoming, her master's from Oregon Health Sciences University, and she's held many bedside and leadership positions from Harborview to OHSU to Colorado to Wyoming. She's a frequent speaker regionally and nationally at many conferences, as well as if you have attended the NTI sponsored by AACN. She is widely published, an editor or an editorial board member for Critical Care Nurse, AACN Advanced Critical Care, and Advanced Critical Care Nursing. So please welcome Christine.
Good morning. It is really such an honor to be here, and I'm coming from Oregon, and it was 33 degrees and foggy this morning, so very appreciative of the sunshine. I'm a trauma gal. I've been one a really long time. The topics that you guys are talking about today and tomorrow are just so sexy. The last 5 years, I've not been able to spend a lot of time with this content, so I'm just sitting in the back, just happy. And now it's time for something different. We're going to slow down a little bit. You can relax the furrow in your brows and following all the fast-packed anatomy and physiology and surgical techniques and resuscitative techniques and stuff, and you're just going to breathe for a couple minutes. Because this is the kind of thinking and breathing that you need to do to keep on doing what you do so well. And I'm going to give you a little disclaimer. It's a little woo-woo. Do you know what I mean by woo-woo? Like woo-woo. It's a little woo-woo. But it is every bit as life and energy sustaining as all the other things that we're talking about. So let me begin. This is a portion of my keynote address that I did as president for the AACN this past year. How many of you have ever listened to a small child ask why? It's kind of a mind-numbing experience, is it not? I don't have children, so when I spend time with a 3-year-old, it's kind of like being dropped into the deep end of the swimming pool, right? There's just no training, there's no acclimatization, none of that biz. And several years ago, 18 exactly, as of a week ago, I got to spend time with my 3-year-old nephew when his little baby sister was born. I was helping my sister out. And she lives in Denver. And if you know anything about Denver in the summer, you know that in the mid-afternoons, the storm clouds come over the mountains and you have torrential downpours and hailstorms. So Noah and I spent a rainy summer afternoon watching Monsters, Inc. together. I was delighted. As smart as I can sound sometimes, I am truly delighted by full-length animated films. So this was going to be a good gig until he started asking questions. Why is that monster so mean? Why is Mike making that noise? Why did that door close? Why, Aunt Cece? Why? I thought my head was going to explode. My sister came home. She was at a doctor's appointment with a baby. She said, "So, how's it going?" I'm like, you really needed to warn me about what this experience was going to be like. I may need a drink here. But the thing is when I reflect upon that moment, I realize that why is how children learn. It's how they make sense out of things. And that makes me wonder, when was it that we grown-ups stopped asking why? When did we become so irritated by it, overwhelmed by it, feeling inadequate by not knowing the answer why? When did that happen? You know, why? It's such a simple, unassuming word, and yet it tells so much about us, who we are, and why we do what we do, why we come back day after day when this word can sometimes be so very, very difficult and so tragic, and why we've chosen to do this work to make our optimal contributions for patients and families during the most vulnerable times of their lives. Most of us can pinpoint the memory, the reason, the experience that led us into medicine, led us into nursing. And fundamentally, whether you're aware of it or not, this reason is really a reflection of your own inherent personal gifts. These are the gifts that when you're doing this work, using these inherent talents, it's energizing. You're very enthusiastic when you do it. And sure, we all need a paycheck. But the work in and of itself is the reward. And it's fundamental to who you are. You may not even be aware of it. How many of you, when you're out to dinner with friends or you meet people and you say you're a trauma nurse, you're a trauma surgeon, they say, oh, I don't know how you do what you do. I couldn't do that. And what do you say? Well, it's just kind of what I do. Ain't no big thing most times, right? Didn't you kind of naturally go this way? So I think about this in the context of an artist, who, when they look around, they see things of beauty everywhere, or an engineer who sees structure and form in every building that they look at, a teacher who finds teachable moments throughout the day. When you're doing your thing as a nurse, you're just doing it. You're in the zone. You also lose track of time. It just flies by. But most importantly, it is giving you the opportunity to serve others, to bring the very best part of yourself forward to serve others in their time of need. Now, what am I talking about when I talk about these gifts? Well, ancient cultures across the world and throughout the millennium have really described these things in different ways, but the concepts are pretty much the same. These are the fundamental elemental energies that drive you and that you have to offer the world. So the model that I like, and get prepared because this is the woo-woo part, is the earth and fire and water and air. So what I'm going to do is just take a couple moments. I'm going to describe the attributes of people who exhibit these gifts. I want you to see which one best describes you. Just a little bit of self-reflection for a moment. It's kind of a fun thing. We don't usually get to think about these things. So people with the gift of earth are very practical. They're very grounded. They live in the moment. They're kind of get-her-done kind of folks. And one of the things that they're especially good at is they can build a stable foundation of work or a plan that others can build on. They're very talented at planning things. And they can troubleshoot very well. And they really focus on, they like to get it done the first time, but they can stick with the project over the long haul. They're very persistent and vigilant, and they don't give up. So when I think about my healthcare colleagues who have strong gifts of earth, I think about a lot of leaders that I've known. I think the military is especially demonstrative of the gift of earth, because there's a plan, and you stick with the plan. There's a hierarchy, and it works. People who coordinate the annual conference chair, trauma program managers are developing foundations. If you work for organizations that have Beacon Awards for Excellence or are magnet facilities, those magnet coordinators, they are not faint of heart. It takes time. And if on the physician end of things, you're one of the quality council chairs or you're building a trauma program, you probably have a good gift of earth. Now, people with the gift of fire are very energetic, very enthusiastic. They too live in the moment, but they want that moment to move quickly. They can make decisions very quickly. They don't need a lot of detail and deliberation. And in fact, when there is a lot of detail and deliberation, they're very easily bored and frustrated. So they can see the end results without a whole lot of process. They take charge. They work well in groups, especially if they kind of get to be the center of attention. And they tend to be really inspiring because they're so action-oriented. So here we are at a trauma conference. I would say that the vast majority of people in this room probably do have a very strong gift of fire. Medicine in general, I think, swings this way, but our subset of the emergency department, the ICU, the surgery suites, people who fly, rapid response teams, and if you're a charge nurse, are there any charge nurses in here? You know, if you're a charge nurse and you find that you like it, rather than feeling like you're being punished for something that you've done, you probably have the gift of fire. Now, the counterpart to all of this energy is the gift of water. So the people with the gift of water are empaths. They are very skilled at communication and teaching. They're approachable. They like to get in tune with the deeper inner feelings and goals and aspirations that other people have. They're great teachers. They're great mediators, very diplomatic people. And one of the things they're especially good at, and they take a lot of joy in, is seeing people who they've mentored succeed and thrive. So who are these folks? It's pretty obvious. These are our preceptors, our teachers, our coaches, our mentors, clinical nurse specialists who really went into the business because they want to teach and help other people grow and do that bedside mentoring. They probably have more water in them. Faculty advisors for residents, and particularly those faculty advisors who get the Residents Teaching Award year after year after year, those are people with strong gifts of water. And then lastly, air energy. Now the thing about air energy is that it is everywhere, and it touches everything. So what this means is that people with the gift of air have the ability to see the interconnectedness of things. They're very curious. They like puzzles. They like data. In fact, when they make decisions, it's not a gut decision. It's not a quick decision. They only make decisions using data, and more data. Okay? So they thrive on communication and reshaping things. When I think about colleagues who have strong gifts of air, these are the writers. These are people who like to speak because they're taking in a lot of detail and making sense out of it. I think a lot of nurse managers and administrators have strong gifts of air because they have to look at a lot of data and make sense out of it and work to create a plan that's going to address it. So trauma program managers also fit here. The clinical nurse specialist who swings to evidence-based practice implementation and research because of their love of data and their ability to make sense out of numbers. And if you're writing practice guidelines and that kind of thing, you are probably someone with a gift of air because you're pulling in all of these different pieces of information and making sense out of it. So here's kind of the fun part of this. How many of you, as I describe these things, would say that your dominant gift was the gift of earth? Practical, grounded, get her done. Okay, this would be the participation part of the program. So I'm going to ask one more time. How many would say that their dominant gift was the gift of earth? Okay, see, now we know. Okay, I needed to cue you up a little better. How many would say that your dominant gift was that of fire? Enthusiastic, you like change, okay? A bunch of liars in here. How many would say water, teachers, empaths? Couple. And how about air, data, puzzles, problem solving? All right. So what do you do with all of this? What do you do with all of this? Okay, so let's make it practical for a moment. One of these probably spoke to you more than others. And when you're finding that your job is hectic and it's lost its luster and you've lost your luster, one of the things you can do is reflect back to why you became a nurse or a doctor and what is it that you're good at, and when you're doing it, what brings you joy. This is your gift. So if you find that you actually do like writing, it's time to write a practice guideline or a paper for publication. If you find that you really did enjoy teaching that new resident or that new graduate, it's time to step forward and take the preceptor workshop. You know, if you're finding that, oh, I don't know, being in the trauma resuscitation bay is getting to be a little mundane and passé, maybe it's time to fly. Or maybe it's time to become certified in something. But you look for the thing that feeds your soul and allows you to thrive and grow, so that amongst all the peas and carrots that we have to get through because it's on our plate, there is a little bit of dessert that can refire you, okay? And even in the work that is so crazy, this nurturing of your soul and of your own purpose is really important. The other thing you do with it is you look for that in others. So you got a staff nurse who's getting really good at managing the admission to the trauma bay. Maybe it's time for that staff nurse to be down in the ED resuscitation bay. Maybe it's time for that nurse to be the trauma resuscitation nurse that goes throughout the hospital putting out fires. Or maybe you see, a junior resident who's doing a great job teaching people and helping them understand what's going on here. It's time for them to start teaching and sharing their results and helping people like that. This tap on the shoulder has incredible power. And you can see it. Sometimes people aren't really so aware of their gifts because they're so close to them, but you see people. And most of us have gotten to where we are because at some point in our career, somebody has tapped us on the shoulder and said, I think you'd be really good at this. And there's no better compliment than to have someone say that they think you can do something even though you didn't know you were ready. Okay? It's a little scary, but there's no greater compliment. Now, how many of you, just to be fair, did not raise your hand because you really felt that these gifts, more than one of them, described you? And you're like, oh, that's me. Well, some days that's me too. And other days I'm this way. I've had people come up to me and say, well, you know, I think I'm fog. And, you know, for them that was water and air. And then I had somebody come up to me and say, I think I'm mud. And I said, well, mud? Yeah, water and earth. So we all have secondary gifts that we tap into depending on the moment, depending on the situation at hand. What you do with this is that you use this to balance yourself out and give you a respite sometimes. But this is how you compose your teams as well. So I'm a pretty fiery person. I'm going to put pressure on something and move on. That's the way I roll. I must have a person with the gift of error, someone who looks at detail, looks at process, is deliberate in their thinking. Because otherwise, I'm going to miss something. And they need me, because otherwise they're going to spin around in circles forever and ever and ever. So together, we're strong. So when you're composing your teams, you want people with these different gifts and talents intentionally, not serendipitously, because that helps us all be as good as we can be, and then there's that strength in all of these gifts coming together. A little woo-woo, but it actually makes sense. When I'm chair of the policy committee for trauma and critical care at Harborview, I was driven nuts by the nurses who were, looking at every little detail, but as a consequence, we had policies and procedures that worked and were correct and that got done. Now, why is this even important? Let's pull it together to our present day reality. Has anybody ever done any reading by Simon Sinek? Yeah, the Start With Why guy. In his book called Start With Why, and in his TED Talk, he talks about understanding why is what inspires us to take action and to be a part of something bigger than ourselves. So I think nursing and medicine in general, it requires us to take action. It inspires us to do so for the patient in the bed, for that family who's in crisis, and for the really big issues that are facing us in healthcare today, like the healthcare system, like caregiver burnout, like technology, friend or foe. These are really big issues, and connecting our core purpose with the task at hand, that connection is your why. It is your core purpose. Now, I don't know how many of you have had the opportunity to read this book. It was written by Viktor Frankl, and Viktor Frankl was an Austrian psychiatrist who was imprisoned in Auschwitz during World War II. And there's a part in this book where he describes how he was on his way to work one day in the prison camp, and he was trying to decide whether he should trade in his very last cigarette for a bowl of soup. Now, I cannot imagine an existence where it would be so grim that the life choice for the day was a cigarette or a bowl of watered-down, mealy, insect-ridden gruel, right? And at this moment, he realized that his life would become trivial and meaningless, and if he didn't find some kind of core purpose, he was not going to survive this horrendous reality that he was in. And his solution was to imagine himself after the war giving lectures to people about the psychology of the prison camp, because it was so very important to him that the people of the world understand what he and his fellow prisoners had endured. In his bleakest, darkest moment, he connected with core purpose, and it made his present reality manageable, survivable. And he went on to survive that experience, and he became a world-renowned psychiatrist and a prolific writer. In his bleakest, darkest moment, he found core purpose. So when I translate that to today, and the challenges in our healthcare environment, we can reconnect with why we went into this work in the first place and allow that to sustain us and to give us vision and to inspire us to do what needs to be done, even though healthcare has so many challenges. Why would I, a mere mortal, nurse, physician, even think about joining that committee? Why would we as a collective unit, a collective department, program work to create healthy work environments? Why should I, you, we even try to fix some of the problems with healthcare when it has so many, many challenges? Because our core purpose really is about patients and families. And you might say to me, okay, Schulman, that's just great, but I only got so much time in a day and there's a lot to do. And I had a nurse in the trauma unit, a very experienced nurse, come up to me and say, all I need is 10 minutes to sit with my patient, to think, and to have some strategy in how I'm going to get through my day, and I can't even get 5. Do you feel like that's your day? All you need is 5 minutes. Well, I'm here to agree that 5 minutes isn't enough, and it sure isn't enough. It isn't as much as it should be. But can it sustain you? Can one thing at a time, rather than the big picture, sustain you so that you're one step at a time, one step at a time, one step at a time? You can't eat the entire elephant, they say. You start with one bite at a time. Dorothy didn't get to Oz because she just, had a helicopter to get her there. It was one step at a time. And this 5 minutes, if you're intentional about it, may be quite enough when the day is said and done. And it can be enough to change things. Now, if I step out of medicine for a little bit and I think about where in the real world this has played out, one of the places that provides us the very best example is the Impressionist painters. So this is Monet, Degas, Van Gogh, Renoir, Manet, all those guys. And in the late 1800s in Paris, they were like all the other painters of the time. They were trained to paint according to the classical rules of art. But these painters, they didn't see the world that way. They saw it very differently, and these were extreme differences. They became the outcasts and the laughingstock of the European art community. And every year in Paris, there was this famous competition called the Salon, and artists from all over the continent were invited to submit their canvases to be displayed and judged, and if they won prizes, they got huge commissions, lifetime commissions from royalty and from the church and from government. Their success was guaranteed. The Impressionists were denied entry into this exhibition. So do you know what they did? What did they do? They put on their own darn show. They said, fine then, we're going to create our own rules, our own processes, and we're going to put on our own rules. They pulled together their resources and their passions, and they put on their own darn show. They invited the public, they invited the critics, and initially, yes, the response was lukewarm. Changing from status quo and the way we've done things is hard to do. But eventually, the critics started to change. And they came to accept and admire this new art style, and then the masses followed. Those rebels became the masters because they believed in and they fought for, and they created a world grounded by their whys. So in this world today of healthcare, we are the masters, the doctors, the nurses, the therapists, the medics. We are the masters who are working to overcome the obstacles to accomplish what is important. We are working on making that bridge between the administrative and the finance people who are driving a bunch of processes that are not connected to the work we do. The electronic documentation that is so rigorous and distant and time-consuming that it doesn't actually reflect what's going on in the moment. There are people working on this in grand scale and at unit scale levels. One of the biggest challenges we face, physicians and nurses in particular, is that about staffing. And this industrial model of looking at a human-based profession as widgets and cutoffs and cutbacks and layoffs is not going to work. It's not going to work. I've been told that mathematically it doesn't work. The workflow algorithms, it doesn't work. Everything about what we do, we were talking earlier, I'm old, I've been doing this a long time. Everything about what we've been doing has changed, and yet we are stuck in old processes. And it's time for us to pool together our passions and talents and get rid of these old policies that do not work and be a little inventive and creative, because it's a brand new, brave new reality, baby. And I see this. Burnout and fatigue is becoming a prolific problem for us and our colleagues. Some of it is, the emotional stress because of the tragedies that we see every day. Some of it is the documentation requirements and the fear of litigation that make us spend so much time with computers that we actually don't interact, have eye contact with patients, and most of us went into patient care because we wanted to take care of people. So a couple of years ago at an NTI, there was a nurse from my neurotrauma ICU. She went to a session on PET therapy and how it reduced stress and burnout, or stress, and created well-being in patients and families. And she thought this would be a great thing for the nursing staff in the ICU. She herself is a dog owner, and when I asked her why she got so engaged in this project, she said, well, when I go home after a hard day at work and I'm tired and I'm sad and I'm stressed, my dogs make me feel better. And I thought it would be likely that it would help my colleagues feel better, and wouldn't it be great if we didn't have to wait till we got home before it happened? This just seemed like the right thing to do. So she met with people from our pet veterinary hospital, have the therapy program. She brought literature to the infectious disease department, who are like, no, no, no. And she's like, yes, yes, yes. And the volunteer services, and after months and months of meetings and policy changes and stuff, they were finally approved to bring dogs into the ICU, not into the patient rooms, but at the nurse's desk and in the back hallways. And this was the first day that happened, and this is Allison. She pulled together a passion and a talent and a need, and she overcame tradition and bias and used evidence, and she changed it for her unit. And now all the other ICUs want to do it, and people want to hear more and more about it. One step at a time. One step at a time. So the challenges are many here, and our default position is often to go into what I cannot do. I can't do this, I can't do that. That's not possible. Isn't it? Isn't that where we go? There's this really great book. It's called The Art of Possibility. It's one of the better ones for me that I read the last couple of years. And the authors say that in the face of difficulty, we can despair, we can get angry, and we do, or we can choose possibility. The thing that energizes that choice and sustains it over time is your why. So whatever small 5-minute thing you do that gives you joy, makes you feel good. You need to figure out what that is and honor it, recognize it. When you're starting your day, say, I'm going to try and teach somebody for 5 minutes a day. I'm going to take 5 minutes to sit with a patient and hold their hand. I'm going to take 5 minutes to look something up that I don't understand. And at the end of the day, do a little inventory. Did you do those things? And if you didn't, don't beat yourself up. Tomorrow's another day. I'll tell you this is important, and not just because I say so, but because I lived it. The short version of this is when my mother got ill. And I found myself at the other side of the bedside. And despite 30 years of helping patients and families come to grips with critical illness and injury, I was completely unprepared for what this felt like. And I was watching those nurses. You can bet I was. And they were checking her ID band every time they gave her a med, and they asked about her pain every time they interacted with her, and they were doing the right thing, and that was great because, I was watching them pretty close. But the thing I remember, the nurses I remember, are the 3 nurses in 2 weeks. 3 nurses who took 5 minutes to sit and connect, to talk with my mom about how she was feeling, about her career teaching at the university, her home in the mountains, who turned to me and said, how are you doing so far away from home? Who asked how my dad was doing. They don't remember me. They don't remember me. They were busy. I'm just one face in many, but I will never forget them. And that's what 5 minutes can mean. It's part of you just getting through the day, but it can mean everything to your patient and your family. So please, let why be the force that inspires you and guides you. It can be like a beautiful butterfly that represents change. The word morphous comes from butterfly because it represents inevitable continuous change. Why can be the wisdom and the learnings of our past experiences so that we look behind us to see how we got here and we look ahead to, kind of see where we're going. Why can be the beacon that lights our path so that we can see clearly where we need to go. It can be like a stethoscope. It can be our ears so that we listen carefully, so we respond to the right thing. It can be the energy and resilience of the hummingbird who can do what it needs to do despite wind and heat and long distances that they must travel. And yes, your why can be the wind behind the sails of the ship that must sail some pretty tumultuous seas these days. So let why be your guide. Never forget it, reconnect with it, adapt and change as you need to be, but never forget why you chose to become who you are. Thank you very much.